Hello and welcome to a special edition of the I/O Remote. The I/O Remote is a monthly reoccurring online live event hosted by Germany's illustrators organization I/O. This time, out of technical reasons, we weren't able to do this as a live event, and thus we produced this little video, which I'm happy to share with you right now. Our guest, I think, doesn't need any special introduction. Most of you will know him as the author of the New York Times best-selling book series Dinotopia. He's also author of the art instruction books Imaginative Realism and Color and Light, which are standard works for artists and illustrators. And I'm very happy and thankful that he found the time to answer our questions, which we can provide you now. So without further ado, please welcome with us the remarkable Mr. James Gurney.
Hey, thank you to Christian Schillerkamp. Hello to the members of the Illustration Organization of Germany. Thank you for inviting me to your regular meeting about illustration. And I've got your questions here to answer. So we'll do a little interview. I'll read your questions here and then answer them as best I can. Sorry you can't read the books on my shelves. You can't read the titles because they're probably kind of blurry, but it's just as well. Let's just start with the questions. It appears you have anticipated changes in the field, such as public fascination with the dinosaurs in the early 90s, and the interest in self-teaching and video in the 2010s. Did you plan strategically for these trends, or did you follow your intuition? No, I bumbled forward without much planning at all, trying to think of a way to make a living after one door closed and I looked for another door that would open. So for example, at the end of the 1980s, I had a hard time finding work doing paperback covers and National Geographic illustrations. So I had this little idea of doing some lost empire paintings of lost worlds, and that led to the idea of Dinotopia. Later on, when Dinotopia had more or less run its course, I did some videos about the making of the books and started a blog, and that blog ultimately led to the books Color and Light and Imaginative Realism. And that was sort of accidental. I made some videos to cover the making of those paintings, and anyway, started some videos on YouTube, which you've probably seen. So really, it's been more trying to find a door to open after another door closed. Who were your inspirations as a young artist? Were you a fan of Frank Frazetta or Ralph Bakshi when you worked as a background painter? I worked on their film, Fire and Ice, which came out in 1983. This was soon after I dropped out of art school. I had received an undergraduate degree from UC Berkeley, first in, of all things, anthropology, moved to Los Angeles, where I went to art school, but I didn't like what I was learning there. It didn't seem rigorous enough. So I dropped out, learned how to paint and draw from books, and found this job doing background paintings for Ralph Bakshi and Frank Frazetta. I knew who Ralph Bakshi was. I'd seen some of his films, but I had no idea who Frank Frazetta was. And that's only because my heroes were much earlier. People like M.C. Escher or Norman Rockwell, people from the early 20th century. And it's funny, I can tell you a little story about that. When I was working on the movie Fire and Ice, I was working on a painting of a forest scene, and I had this idea of having one little spot of light coming in, hitting one of the trees in the forest. Right then, Frank Frazetta, who's known for his sword and sorcery, heroic, barbaric paintings, came into the room, and I said, "Look, Frank, I did this painting, and I used this light effect that N.C. Wyeth used to use." And he said, "N.C. Wyeth? Forget about N.C. Wyeth. This is a Frazetta painting." He wanted me to use ideas from his paintings. And I greatly admired both artists the more I got to know them, and it was great fun to work on that project. Tell us about your friendship with Thomas Kinkade. How did you develop your careers outside of the gatekeeper industries? Okay, Thomas Kinkade, for those who know who he is was known as the painter of light. He died about 10 years ago. And we met in 1976 as freshman roommates at UC Berkeley We went to art school after studying at UC Berkeley and eventually got the job side by side doing background paintings for that movie. We also worked together on a book called The Artist's Guide to Sketching, which came out in 1982. And he was a good friend. We had a lot of adventures riding on freight trains. And as far as the gatekeeper industries, I think by what you mean is every art field in the 1980s had a gatekeeper deciding who got in, who got published, who got accepted to art school. And if you wanted to break out of that, it was basically impossible because everything was controlled by a gatekeeper back then, unless you could publish your own work. And that's what Thomas Kincaid did. He, after finishing up at Fire and Ice and finishing our book, Artist's Guide to Sketching, he started his own print company. For me, that came later when I started really with social media and realized that there are no gatekeepers now, in a way, because you can create your own media and reach your own audience directly. Okay, how did you network with friends in analog times? Could you please describe how you used cassette tapes, letters, and group sketching games to connect with others? Well, yes, before the digital age, when connecting with other people is so easy, it took a little more effort to connect. So when we were all together, us art students and art professionals in Los Angeles, we all lived in the same apartment building. And we would get together and do sketching games where one person would start a sketch, pass it on to the next person, and add to it. We called that book of those sketches Art by Committee. We also, later when we all moved to different places, we circulated cassette tapes to each other. They were like letters, audio letters, and it was sort of a prototype for blogging and for video creation later on. And I've released a few of those on my YouTube channel, almost as podcasts. Thomas Kincaid and I rode the freight trains across America, and we documented some of that on audio. And I've shared some of that online. But we don't have very many photographs of that period, but we have a lot of audio captures of those moments. Okay, let's move to another category, dinosaurs, Dinotopia, and the creative process. Okay, how did you come up with the idea for Dinotopia? Basically, I'd been working for National Geographic magazine as an illustrator of ancient world stories, reconstructing archaeological scenes. And after that period, I had this idea of creating a world as if it was a world that had never been discovered, like an archaeological site that was about to be discovered. Like when Heinrich Schliemann discovered Troy, for example. No one knew about Troy at the time. Or when Hiram Bingham discovered Machu Picchu in the Andes in 1911. There was a whole lost world, but it was a real world. And I had this idea that what if there was a fantasy world that we could imagine with humans and dinosaurs that existed somewhere that could be discovered. So in order to come up with this, develop this idea, I did a series of large paintings, Dinosaur Parade and other paintings, and then connected them together with a story, which I wrote and illustrated. And that was published in 1992, Dinotopia, A Land Apart from Time. And I did 3 other sequels after that that continued the adventures and told some of the backstory of this whole civilization. What's the inspiration for Bix? What is your favorite dinosaur, and which dinosaur do you find most enjoyable to draw? Well, Bix is a Protoceratops dinosaur, and Bix is the ambassador and the translator who welcomes the point of view characters, Arthur and Will Dennison, when they arrive on the shores of Dinotopia. And I liked the idea of a Protoceratops because it seemed to me that it's better to, if you have a world of intelligent or sentient dinosaurs, it's better to not have them all talking. The ones that I decided to have talking dinosaurs were the ceratopsians, or the beaked dinosaurs, because like parrots, they would probably have the ability or the capacity to talk, and mimic human languages. So the inspiration was various parrots and parakeets that I had seen, who are amazingly intelligent creatures. My favorite dinosaur has changed. I used to love doing the Stegosaurus, drawing the Stegosaurus. It's one of the most difficult to draw, but the most satisfying because it's all those plates on its back and the spiky tail. It's very difficult to draw all those plates in perspective. I would say the dinosaur I like painting the most now is the Microraptor, because it's one of the feathered dinosaurs that's been discovered more recently, and a little bit more is known about that now. We even know the coloration of Microraptors, and it's the four-winged dinosaur that I've featured in Journey to Chandara. Okay, can you talk about your process for reconstructing extinct animals or civilizations? Okay, this is a fairly lengthy process, starting with rough sketches out of my imagination, developing those further, doing a lot of research, reading about the subject, thinking of analogs of contemporary civilizations or animals that are similar to the ones I'm trying to imagine, and then often building a maquette or a three-dimensional model of what I want it to look like. That helps with lighting and foreshortening. And then if it's a human model, a character I'm trying to reconstruct, I like to have a person posing in costume, in a real costume. And then from those sketches and drawings or photos of the model, I take those and put them together and do a drawing of the charcoal comprehensive, where I do a charcoal drawing of the whole scene, either a line drawing or a full tonal study, and then color sketches and tonal sketches, and then the final oil painting. All this, of course, takes a long time. And it might take as long as a month or even 2 months for a really elaborate painting. This process is based on the working method of Norman Rockwell and some of the 19th century academic painters who were my heroes in art school and after art school when I was learning this process. And I mention all these steps in my book called Imaginative Realism, which came out in 2008. Now, this is a real specific painter's question. How do you think about the depth or darkness of shadows versus the lights in painting compared to photography or real life? Now, I know what you're talking about. It's often the tendency for painters to make the shadows too close in value to the area of the light side, or the illuminated area of the scene. Shadows in, at least shadows in sunlight are darker than they appear. You have to paint them darker and consciously make them darker. Sometimes they almost look black in photos. But the reason that we see so much detail in shadows is that our eyes adjust to the shadow, and we start seeing a lot more variety of values, and we put those in our painting. But we have to force ourselves to unify the shadows and unify the lights if we want to convey a convincing impression of natural sunlight. Let's take a little break, and we'll come right back. Okay, restarting part 2 because my battery will quit after 15 minutes. Okay, work-life balance and psychology. With long-term projects like Dinotopia, how have you dealt with phases of doubt? Well, with a big project like this, there are moments when you doubt how it's going to work or how your process is going to carry you to the finish. The only way I know how to do that is to break a big problem into smaller steps and make them achievable steps that I can do one after another. So in the case of Dinotopia, I did a storyboard and then a longer outline, and then I did a design for each of the page layouts, and then I did the final artwork sequentially from start to finish, and then I wrote the actual text of the story itself, all of which took about 2 or 3 years. My friends were telling me, dinosaurs aren't popular. Why are you wasting your time on dinosaurs? This was 1992 or 91, before Jurassic Park came out. And once Jurassic Park came out and was a big sensation in 93, the movie, and the book. It really helped support people's interest in Dinotopia, which was a contrast to the world of Jurassic Park. But it was tough because I had to tell my clients that I was working on this long-term project and I couldn't take any assignments. And so I had to go for a long time without knowing whether this would work or not. It was really not a given that Dinotopia would be successful. Can you tell us how your married life and family life relates to your art career and how you have balanced work and family? Well, talking about Dinotopia, when it came out in '92, I had 2 kids in diapers, and it was definitely challenging to find the time and balance all these different elements and demands on my attention and on my time. But oddly enough, even with young kids around, I was probably more productive than I would have been at any other time in my career. And I don't know why that is. I liked having my kids in the studio while I was working. Sometimes that was a little tricky because they'd be playing with Legos while the phone would ring. It'd be a paleontologist calling, and I'd have to explain to them what was going on around me. Nowadays, everyone's used to kids being around your workplace. My wife, Jeanette, is an artist too. We met in art school as sketching buddies. So it's definitely a pleasure to have an artist close by, someone whose taste I trust, and to help give me feedback on the project at various stages. Despite your experience, do you still run into challenges while painting? Yes, every painting is a challenge. Sometimes painting goes fairly easily, but usually it doesn't. Usually it's difficult. And usually when I think it's going to go well, it's tough. And the ones that present the most challenges often end up being the most successful. So it doesn't bother me if something is challenging. I just know the only way to solve it is by working on it, trying to be willing to change it, erase it, start over, and do it again. So it's all part of the process, and I've had it happen enough times that it doesn't bother me anymore. You do a lot of creative stuff: illustration, commissions, painting outdoors, giving workshops, making stop-motion movies, posting on social media. How do you manage to do all this without getting burned out? Well, burned out never happens. I don't know. I've always got some new crazy idea that I want to try. I do a lot of different kinds of things because my hero was Leonardo da Vinci, who did everything, science and art. I come from a family of engineers. My dad was a mechanical engineer, and his dad and his grandfather were mechanical engineers too. And so they were all crazy inventor types. My dad built these anemometers, these wind vanes that would spin around on our rooftop. And he was an inspiration to me for just in your spare time, trying out new materials, testing things. If they didn't work, that's okay. I would when I was a teenager, I made a lot of gliders, including a flying wing, which had elevons for control surfaces. It was a very unusual design. I'd never seen a plan or known of anyone building one before, but it flew quite well until it crashed and the wing broke off. The tradition in my family was when something crashed, an experimental design, we would just laugh endlessly. And that was sort of the way we would respond to disaster. What do you do for your mental health? How do you recover? I mean, recover from what? As far as mental health goes, I mean, we all have our ups and downs, but I've never luckily had any major depression or things like that. For me, I try to overcome discouragement or disappointment or slack periods by just working. Sometimes it takes a while for a project to connect commercially, but I don't mind if it doesn't. A lot of what I do now with social media is just to do content that I give away, knowing that you have to give material away in order to be able to sell it later to other people. So it's a crazy business, so I don't really know the answer for that. How do you keep your motor running as an artist in the long run? I think just by working a little at a time, trying to solve problems, by breaking them down into smaller pieces, like I said earlier. I've never really lacked for ideas or inspiration, but maintaining focus and not being distracted, especially these days by social media, is always a challenge. It's a challenge for all of us. And sometimes I like just going to an old-fashioned medium like a typewriter, a manual typewriter, to focus my mind and to avoid distraction. Teaching technology and digital tools. Speaking of distractions and social media, how did you develop your teaching approach in your book, Color and Light? Well, Color and Light, I wanted to work with a publisher on this project. I had this idea for a book that sort of downloaded my thoughts about color, light, and also imaginative realism, this process of making realistic pictures of imaginary subjects. And the publisher that I wanted to work with had never really done books on that topic before. So what I did was I approached them. They liked the idea, but they didn't have any editors that were art-related editors. But by this point, this is about the late 2009 or so, 2008, I had developed a lot of blog posts. And the thing about writing blog posts is that you know your audience. They respond to what you're writing. You know what topics are boring, what topics are challenging, what topics are confusing. And it helps to hone the message and to clarify what it is you're trying to say. So I took all those blog posts, organized them into a book, and I realized I had 2,000 editors who specialized in art, and all my readers, I knew exactly what they liked and what they didn't like, and that guided me to organizing my thought process for Color and Light. So it's a real privilege to have this audience out there, and I think for any writer, it's a great help to be connected with your readers before you even complete your book. Have you ever considered using digital tools for image making? If not, why not? How would you assess the current balance between traditional and digital artists? Well, first of all, I do use digital tools to some extent. I use nonlinear video editing for my videos, and of course I'm using a digital camera now. But for actually creating images themselves, I still like drawing and painting using regular brushes and paint, because I love the feedback, the haptic feedback of my hands, and the control that I get by drawing and painting in that way. I love that connection, direct connection between my eye and my hand. I would never want to lose that. And I also love the physical existence of an original, the tactile existence. I just frustrated when I can't get that in a digital image. No matter how miraculous the tools are, they don't give me that immediate visceral connection. Tell us about the inventor side of your career. Where do those interests come from, and how have you used them in connection with your artwork? Well, I mentioned earlier that my dad was an engineer, and part of that has expressed itself in the camera controls that I've used from time to time, using Lego-powered motors to move the camera along a curved track. All these are very primitive tools, but they work really well for doing motion control for cameras. So all those gears and all those parts are just part of my enjoyment of making things with my hands. I also like sculpting, and that comes from the fact that as a kid I liked doing metal casting and welding. Well, even in fourth grade I was doing steel welding. And in Germany, I know you have a slightly different way of education than we do here in the States, where students at high school level have a chance to work in industrial applications if they want to. And I think that's a great idea, and it's good for people to have access to those tools. When I was in high school, I had a great teacher who let me use an animation stand to try out basic film animation. And I was just self-taught, but it was a great experience. Later on in college, I learned how to do latex casting to make a mask. So I made a fiberglass mold of my head and then built out a face in clay, molded that in plaster, and I could make various kinds of masks on a mold that would fit my head. All this was done completely in the dark. I had no training in it. It was just trial and error, but it's a good way to learn. Okay, how do you see the development of AI art or generative art affecting the illustration profession? Now, this is a very big question and one I've been thinking a lot about lately. I think that the development of AI art is as fundamental of an invention as Photoshop was, and maybe even as much as photography itself. It revolutionizes the way we make images, and it revolutionizes a lot of other things. It will not only make it easier for everyone to become an art director, it'll allow machines into the realm of image creation, which is a really fundamental idea. I think one of the things we'll have to say goodbye to is the idea that a single individual is the author of an image. The author of an image really may well be a group of people. The feedback of your viewers may shape the image that's created that they see. The art director, is that someone who comes up with the prompt? Who is the author of the image? Is it the prompt writer, or is it the person who wrote the software? We already have Imagen, and we have DALL-E 2, and we have DALL-E Mini, we have Midjourney, and we have so many others, Parti, and there's going to be spectral diffusion. There's already a lot out there, and there's going to be more. There'll be many more kinds of tools that are open source. I think one of the problems or challenges will be content moderation, because if these tools are designed to stop an image from being created before it's created, it gets into almost like thought control, which makes me really uneasy. We don't want to see that. On the other hand, we don't want to see our reality shattered by having images that are designed to fit everyone's preconceptions. These are fundamental questions, and I don't think we can begin to see the potential of this technology now at its outset, but I do think it'll change our idea of copyright. I'm not worried about the fact that it draws upon databases of illustrators' work, because it's transformative, just as a fan art is transformative. So that doesn't bother me at all. But the question is, when you look at the results of these tools at this stage, there's a lot of problems with image coherence. That is, someone has 3 arms or you have 2 horizons, because the technology doesn't understand basic facts about how the world works. So the question is, at this stage, how is that knowledge of the world going to be imparted into the technology? Will it be there as you increase the data sets? Or will there need to be some form of embodied cognition or embodied learning that these systems can impart to their images? I don't think we really know yet how that's going to be solved. But Gary Marcus and others have been thinking about this aspect of artificial intelligence. And until it's solved, I don't think these images will be fully convincing, especially when it comes to illustrating multiple people interacting or humans interacting with the world. Do you think AI art will have the counterintuitive effect of raising the interest in traditional art and process-driven artwork? The answer is a simple yes to that question, and maybe that's a good place to end, is yes, this will displace a lot, this technology of AI art will displace a lot of artists who currently work in, say, the concept art, digital art, or any realm of surrealism, but it's not likely to displace the work of artists who work in traditional media. In fact, it's very likely to enhance interest in people who paint with brushes and paints. At least that's my hope. The only way you can prove that you made something by hand is by seeing it made. And the only way to do that is by video. So that'll probably enhance the interest in videos of people making art. That'll probably push all of us to become slightly more performative in the way we approach art making. In other words, a video of a painting being made is like a performance. I know that has an insidious quality sometimes, but it's also making a picture is magic. So in summary, although I've been around a while and seen a lot of different ways of making art, art making is still, let's hope, taking an idea that's in your mind, translating it into some visible form that you can share with others. And what form that image takes that they enjoy and what role they play in shaping the art is also another question. Will there be art that's shaped by a biofeedback loop between the art and the viewer? No longer can we think of ourselves as the sole creators of our images. We're entering a world now where the making of art is a kind of a magical process that will be shared among all of us. And that's a good thing. It's a little bit scary because it's so different, but it's a good thing fundamentally. And we're in a more visual age now than we've probably ever been. So again, thanks for inviting me to be part of your I.O. remote. I wish you all the best, and give me feedback on this video, and I'll look forward to reading your comments. Thank you.